And just note that this is being recorded, and by attending this meeting, your consent's being included with this recording. So just to highlight that. But most importantly, first thing we want to do is acknowledge the traditional owners. And I'm on the Gulajan country here. Individual speakers might want to refer to theirs, which translate as people of the sand, which is the Lake Colac area. And we've recognised traditional owners' continuing connection to lands, waters, and communities, and paying our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are listening today, and to their elders past, present, and emerging. And I think one of the things I like to always think about with traditional owners is their strong connection to the land and seeing change and how that land's influence their cultural and social values, and it's something that we can all learn from as well. Coming to the speakers, we have Dr. Dave Kendal, we have Patrick Fisher, and we have Ian Allen. Dave is going to start first, and then we're actually going to move to the video which Ian has recorded, and then Patrick is going to go last. His is probably going to be the most interesting, so you'll have to stick around and listen to him and not disappear. He's going to come at it a bit differently, but they're all going to be terrific. I know two of the people, and I know they do really good work, and I'm sure Patrick is going to give us something really interesting. But firstly, we're going to start with Dave. In terms of instructions for today, in terms of questions, please put them in the chat. I'll try to keep up with you. We want to leave questions to the end so that everyone gets a chance to present their questions until you get to hear everything, because your question might be answered by another speaker. So presentations will range from about 10 to 20 minutes each, so they should be fairly snappy. But please note your questions to the end. And while the speaker's presenting, if you can turn your video off so we can preserve as much bandwidth, that would be great. But I want to first introduce Dr. Dave Kendal. Some of you will know him. Dave works in that urban nature and ecology. He's done a fair bit of work in climate change and climate change resilience and risk assessment as well. But without further ado, I will hand over to Dave, who will share his screen, and I'll turn my camera off. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for having me along. So I'm sure I know some of you, but I'm currently a director of a company called Future in Nature, but I've worked at the Melbourne Gardens previously and worked at universities. I'm on Palawa country in Tassie at the moment, so I was based in Tassie. I'm back in Victoria now.
Yeah, his job is making sure places are pulled correctly.
Oh, can someone mute? So I do a mix of kind of more biophysical work on plants and climate change, but quite a lot of what I do is based on your sort of social sciences, so stakeholder engagement and sort of surveys of values. So this is a survey we did a few years ago. I'll start sharing my screen. So I presented this in Singapore at the Global Botanic Gardens Congress last year. All right, hopefully everybody can see that. So this was based on a survey that we did with Sharon Willoughby, some of you might know. So she's the Manager of Interpretation at Kew, and a PhD student, Hayley Kaplan, at the University of Tasmania. All right, get started. So I guess the context for this is botanic gardens are really relevant at the moment in a world that's grappling with climate change and biodiversity loss. So both of those things, I think that botanic gardens have a really important role in contributing to societal outcomes. So I do a lot of work on cities and green space, and botanic gardens are really important green spaces in cities. So they provide multifunctional benefits. There's a big emphasis on plants and plant conservation. But as we all know, there's a lot of mental health and physical health benefits and ecosystem services that botanic gardens can provide. So there's a lot of work trying to understand visitors, but I think that there's opportunities to look outside the garden fence a little bit more and start to engage non-visitors. So that was really the focus of our survey. So there is some work, some science, research work that's been done looking at visitors and visitor satisfaction in particular. So people trying to understand the role of botanic gardens. Visitors see botanic gardens as a place for recreation and relaxation. There's work on the organisations of botanic gardens, how they see themselves. So that they see themselves as being focused on horticulture, science, and conservation. And there's been a fair bit of work looking at volunteers, so where there's a focus on education in particular. So that's kind of the basis, what we're working from with this survey. So I've just got to move things so I can see them. So yeah, we're trying to really understand these non-visitors, and we're thinking about things other than satisfaction. So satisfaction is kind of conceived as the difference between people's experience and their expectations. So they're satisfied when their experience exceeds their expectations, and dissatisfied when the opposite's true. So you need to be a visitor really to understand satisfaction. So we need other concepts when we're thinking about non-visitors. So yeah, there's quite a lot of kind of technical statistical work that underpins it that I'm not going to talk about too much. So there's some specific research questions and understanding a few different kinds of cognitive constructs, so a sort of psychometric survey. So the key kind of concepts, so I'm mostly going to talk about beliefs here, but the other key things that we explored in the survey were values. So these are not how people value botanic gardens, but people's values, what's important to them and how that's expressed in relationship to botanic gardens. So the typology we're using here is one about the environment. So that distinguishes altruism. So people think other people are important, from biospherism, where people think the environment's important, and egoism, where people think themselves are important. So beliefs are things that people believe to be true, and also normative beliefs are the way that people think the world should be. So that kind of idea of social norms a little bit. Yeah, and satisfaction we talked about. Happy, there's a lot of detail that I'm not going to talk about today, but if you've got questions, happy to answer them. So we surveyed 1,000 people and asked questions about values, beliefs, satisfaction, and frequency of visitation, and a few demographic questions. Probably don't need the map of Australia for this presentation, but so we got 983 responses, which is pretty good. It was using an online polling marketing company, so we were able to get a pretty representative sample of the Australian population. I'm not going to talk too much about the statistical analyses, but so yeah, first looking at frequency of visitation. So most people actually weren't frequent visitors of botanic gardens. So neighbourhood parks and regional parks were the most frequently visited green spaces. Some of the other parts of the survey were focused a bit more on green spaces. But yeah, still there was reasonable visitation. So 45% of people considered themselves fairly frequent visitors. Satisfaction, botanic gardens were almost the most, people were most satisfied with their visits to botanic gardens compared to other kinds of green space, which is good. So yeah, there was, I think this probably not surprising. There's a sort of strong story that people are pretty satisfied. I probably should say that because it's a representative sample, probably Sydney and Melbourne are pretty overrepresented in the results, because most people live near those gardens compared to other ones. So that does, I think, shape some of the results we got. Okay, so what I'm really going to talk about today is the results of this normative beliefs that we were asking. So we asked people what they think botanic gardens should be places for. So we asked a lot of questions, and doing some statistical analysis, we came up with 10 factors, and we were able to group those into 3 different kind of related groups of reasons that people thought botanic gardens should exist. So the first lot we're calling through plants. So these are botanic gardens are important to people, and their role is focused on the benefits they provide through plants. So that's things like well-being. These were the most the strongest responses. Different kinds of relaxation and sorry, I'm just gonna so I can see a bit better. Yeah, social activities like interactions with other people, picnics, nature appreciation. And the second group we're calling for plants. So these are those sort of traditional missions of botanic gardens. So about plant conservation and horticulture and science. And then the last group, which were the lowest rated, so people had less. They were still positive, so they still thought that botanic gardens should be this, but this was less strong than the other ones. Is with plants, so that's where it's for entertainment or commercial activities or fitness activities. So still positive, but less strong. People have less strong views than the other dimensions. So there's a whole lot of statistics that I'm not going to go through, and we can talk about how values and other demographic factors influence that. But basically, I'll just mention that there was a difference between frequent and infrequent visitors. So people who were infrequent or non-visitors had even weaker beliefs about the role of botanic gardens for these commercial activities. So they still strongly believed they were for well-being and nature experience, passive recreation, but also conservation and horticulture and plant science. And yeah, so we're kind of thinking about this maybe as a belief and action gap. And so maybe botanic gardens can do things to attract visitors that align with the way that they see the role of botanic gardens in the world. So yeah, we could obviously do work trying to change people, but that's difficult. I think that but if we better understand how people, particularly non-visitors, see botanic gardens, we can have programs that align with that. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of focus in botanic gardens, obviously on revenue and doing this more commercial and event activities. But I feel that this survey is showing that people really strongly think about this sort of ideas of mental health and passive recreation and plant science and horticulture and conservation. So perhaps those events need to be more strongly linked to those. Just to align better with what people's expectations are and to connect better with those non-visitors as well. I think that's all I'm going to say. So yeah, they've got lots of other slides and stats if anybody's interested, but I think I'll stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Dave. People, please hold your questions, but yeah, write down them or put them in the chat if you've got questions. I think that was a really interesting insight into the benefits of botanic gardens. So we'll come back to that. We're going to move into the video by Ian Allen now. So Ian's a supervisor of natural areas and arboriculture at the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens. He's also the convener of BARB, which is a Botanic Gardens arboriculture. Can't remember the rest of it, but it's a subgroup of BGANs, and he's doing a great job of profiling the role of arborists in botanic gardens. But without further ado, he's been working in horticulture for over 25 years and based at the Blue Mountains Botanic Garden. But he's got a recording here that he's kindly done for us, and it's about the valuation of the plants themselves. So thanks, Rebecca. I'll hand back to you to play the video.
Okay, just everybody let me know if it works. Okay, I'm going to start it now, and it's on a little bit faster than normal because it's a bit long.
Rebecca, I'm not seeing it, so I don't know if you're sharing your screen, but it's not coming up on my side. It could be slow.
Okay, can anybody else see it?
No, I can't see it either, Rebecca.
No.
Right, okay.
Just deep breath, everyone. We'll get there.
Deep breath, yeah. I'm including sound, I am sharing, and it looks like, can you see anything now?
It's coming up now.
Okay, I'll go back to the beginning. Right, okay, Peter?
Yeah, I can't hear the sound yet.
No, I haven't started it. I'll start it now.
Okay, so hello, hi there everyone. You might not be able to see me right now. This is the first time I've recorded something like this, but I'd just like to introduce myself. My name's Ian Allen. I'm the Supervisor of Natural Areas and Arboriculture up at the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens at Mount Tomah, part of Botanic Gardens of Sydney. And I'm also the convener of the BCARM's Arboriculture Group, or we like to refer to ourselves as BARB. And I'd like to just say thank you to BCARM for inviting me to contribute to this exciting discussion on behalf of BARB. I'm away on fieldwork this week, but I couldn't pass up on the invitation to be part of such an important conversation. And with the theme of Botanic Gardens Week being Guardians of the Green, Protecting Our Future, I think that a conversation about valuing our collections and how we can put a dollar value on what we are protecting is super important. And I guess our expert arborists are excited to work with BCARM and the BCARM's network to hopefully develop a living collection valuation method that's specific to the unique context of botanic gardens. So before I move on, I'd just like to acknowledge that traditional owners upon the lands from which we're all meeting today and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm on Darug and Gundungurra land normally at work, but this week I'm away on Wiradjuri land. And as the carers and stewards of our amazing trees, we feel it's important to consider the deep and ancient connection First Nations people have with the trees. And I think that's evident in these amazing culturally modified trees, such as the one on screen, which is on Wiradjuri land. And hopefully we can learn and incorporate this deep knowledge and culture and perspective into our practices as the carers for the trees. And I guess I feel in the context of this presentation, it's really important to acknowledge that First Nations people clearly valued trees, both culturally and as providers of items of importance. Recently, I was speaking about stone tools with the Darug elder, and he said to me, all people value and trade things that they need for survival and that took skill to make or were hard to come by. And I've seen this amazing bark canoe displayed at the Australian Museum, but has it been valued by the museum? I honestly don't know. So I'm not going to get bogged down in slides today. I've got a lot to cover. It's a very complex topic, but for those that aren't familiar with BARB, we advocate for the trees and our arborists across the BCARM's network. We're just a young sapling in terms of a professional group, and we're growing and optimising our efforts to improve things for our trees and tree management across BCARM's and for its member gardens. And hopefully this presentation is going to be up on the new BCARM's website and can be accessed later as a resource. For a broader presentation on some of the economic benefits provided by our trees, I encourage you to go to the BCARM's YouTube channel for a BARB forum that we did a while back on that topic. But in today's presentation, I'd really like to focus on how our BARB network and our expert arborists can contribute towards developing a living collection valuation method that's informed by the methods that have been practiced by consulting arborists for quite a long time. We'll start with why. Why should we try and get a method to put a monetary value on our trees? If we can determine a monetary value for our trees, which are the biggest green things that we garden, then surely we can be better guardians and protectors of their future. This quote from Burnley Associate Professor Dr. Greg Moore, who's been in this game for a very long time, shows that the field of arboriculture has also been working in this space for quite a time. And trees have an inherent value. Trees cost money to grow, plant and maintain. And when we couple that with the fact that trees are cultivated all around us, this implies that we as a society have already ascribed an inherent value or worth to trees. We wouldn't bother if they didn't have a value or provide us with a vast array of benefits. And one could argue that you could apply this thinking to all plants in cultivation and in particular to our amazing botanic gardens. Would our gardens exist if we didn't have a value to society? And throughout this presentation, when I say the word trees, you can in your mind substitute that with plants. And I guess it goes without saying that everything I say is applied to the unique context of botanic gardens. To many of us, this quote, which is also from Dr. Moore, sounds like we're preaching to the choir, but I think it can be unpacked and help us stay on track a bit. Arborists often lament the fact that we have to remind people, even those in botanic gardens, that trees are plants too. Furthermore, like, you know, they're often the most long-lived and biggest plants in our landscapes and our ecosystem or ecosystems. They provide exponentially more benefits than smaller plants, and they're often considered apex keystone species in ecological communities. And I'd also say that, you know, that includes our anthropogenic ecosystem and our own ecological community that we live in. And when we're valuing anything, it makes sense to start with what you think the most valuable items are. If we were having our home or contents valued for insurance purposes, we wouldn't go and start with the rusty old bike down the back corner or our dusty CD collection. I mean, maybe I would. There's some pretty cool 90s grunge in there. But and we wouldn't start with the cutlery drawer. We'd definitely start with the house and the car. So aside from enabling the conversation with stakeholders who may not see the inherent value of our living collections, these are just some of the reasons to value our tree collections in terms of dollars. I guess anyone who's ever sat in a high-level budget meeting or read annual report ledgers knows that amenity horticultural management is often seen as a cost, not a money-saving activity, let alone a money-making activity. And imagine if we can demonstrate that we have actually increased the value of our living assets. But beware, if we solely focus on a dollar value, we risk losing sight of some of those inherent values, such as cultural values, ecological values, and amenity values. In the image on the left there, that's Wiradjuri artist Darren Charlwood carving the Yearong spirit tree at Royal Botanic Gardens, Sydney. And in the middle, that's a Gangang cockatoo that I photographed recently in a heritage walnut at the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens. And on the right is, you know, the iconic image of the view at Farm Cove at Royal Botanic Gardens, Sydney. And some of these values can actually be incorporated into a monetary valuation. However, they're often highly subjective and they're disputed elements, but we'll come to that in a little bit. It's important to consider, though, that with contemporary science supporting the quantification of tree benefits, particularly the economic benefits and the ecosystem services, some of these can actually now be quantified in terms of dollars. And there, you know, how can we do this? Well, there are many people and organisations across our network that have been working on this for some time, and this BCARM forum's evidence that great minds are already considering the problem. But existing methods used for tree valuation in Australia can definitely be adapted to the specific context of our botanic gardens. They're not the only methods, and I'm super keen to hear the perspectives of the other presenters from sectors with similar collections and functions, and I can't wait to get back from fieldwork and watch this forum. But to provide that context to the unique role and values in our botanic gardens, I'd recommend anyone that these BGCI resources are essential reading. In them, you know, they highlight that we need to adapt our thinking and actions from existing methods and other sectors to the unique context of botanic gardens, and in our, you know, where I work in the space I'm in, specifically to trees. In addition to my education in tree evaluation as a consulting arborist, much of what I learned was informed by when, in 2019, the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens was impacted by the Black Summer fires, and we suffered some losses to our living collection. I was involved in the assessment of the impacts to that, and I assisted in the valuation of the losses. And the BGCI Tech Review on Disaster Recovery pointed me to a really good reference I'll talk about in a sec called the Plant Appraiser's Guide for Plant Valuation. I'd been aware of it, but it was a while since I'd really done a lot of tree valuation, and it's got that tech review has amazing case studies and recommendations in it. And that is indeed on the front cover, the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens immediately after that 2019 bushfire. So in the Plant Appraiser's Guide, they define appraisal as the act or process of developing an opinion of value. And appraisal is synonymous with the word value. In that book, they outline some core concepts and economic principles that are a must to be understood before any valuation is attempted. And the trick for us is how do we apply these to the Botanic Gardens context, so that any method that we develop is robust and defendable. I'm not going to go into the details of that book and all those concepts. It does a better job than me, than I ever could. And, it's important to state, like I'm not an academic, I'm not an economist, and I'm not an insurer in particular, and I'm not even any good at maths. But as Dr. Moore said, we must use an accepted method. In Australia, for tree valuation, there's a few methods that have been around for a while, but the most broadly and accepted and used methods are the Thayer method, and some versions of that, and the Burnley method. And City of Sydney actually engaged Peter Thayer to adapt his method to their context. And historically, Royal Botanic Gardens Sydney actually used his method when trees have been damaged. They've used it to hold bonds over development projects as an incentive to avoid damage to trees. But these methods need to be updated and adapted to our context. They don't factor effectively the unique values of our living collections, and they're historically hotly contested. The red arrows in this slide point to some of those subjective elements, and they're often the really disputed ones. They also lead to vast differences in the overall values that come out of these methods. And one method can give a mature tree, like a heritage fig, a value of $8,000, and another method could give that exact same tree $200,000 as a value. But if we put our minds to it, I believe we can adapt or substitute some of those value multipliers for some solid multipliers that are unique to the Botanic Gardens context. In particular, things like origin, wild sourced, garden, Indigenous or overseas, the conservation significance, the scientific value, and the public interest value. Surely origin and conservation value play into scarcity and therefore impact the dollar value. But how we exactly do that is yet to be decided. Also, there are some other methods used across the globe. However, the same issues exist, most notably broad differences in output. For example, this is in the papers right now. The sycamore gap tree was valued at approximately 1.2 million Australian dollars in the legal proceedings in the trial for the guys that cut it down, using a method called the capital asset value for amenity tree method, or the CAVAT method. And that's already in dispute. And interestingly enough, the damage to Hadrian's Wall from when they felled it, that damage was valued at 2,275 Australian dollars. So there we see some of the issues right there. And that brings us to the issue about subjective versus objective values. I'm quite chuffed with this slide. But whilst tree significance undoubtedly contributes to the value of a tree in our living collection, can we agree on how it impacts a monetary value? And to drive that home, again, I'm pretty chuffed with this one too, we can get lost in debating the more subjective components of the valuation methods. And this is part of the reason why finding an acceptable and agreed valuation method's been so difficult. But we need to apply our contemporary thinking and science to ensure that we value trees in the context of Botanic Gardens. And, in the case of these veteran trees, we can actually quantify many of the elements of the value in this tree. And we also need to exert our influence as authority on plants and gardening to change public perception of these values. And just to add to that, larger, more mature trees with their fuller crowns, etc., provide vastly more benefits than smaller trees. And this is a quote out of some of the Global Trees campaign stuff, and those people there are some of the brightest people working in this space. And that statement isn't just an opinion, that is backed up by some solid science and solid numbers. But I think the best way to move forward is that we agree on a base valuation method. And if we can work on the more objective elements, then how we can then factor in the subjective parts later, we can agree on that and we can work away. But getting that base value is going to give us a defendable method, and we're going to be able to build upon that, and it's better than nothing. So to establish a base method or a base value supported by objective evidence, we need to start here, and this is informed by some of the work we did after the 2019 bushfires. So can we determine that base replacement cost Was the plant wild collected? You know, some of these other multipliers that we can put numbers to. Do we have nursery and prop data? And how much does it cost to establish that replacement? That's where it all begins in most of the accepted methods. And good record keeping is everything. The BCARM boffins may just be the most important contributors to this process, after the Barbies, of course, which is our little fun name for the Barb people. But you guys can buy me a drink later at the Congress later in the year, and we'll have a bit of a chat about that. But from that work we did in the bushfires, you know, we had documented impacts. We used a method to do that. We had good record keeping in our RSBG database, and I ended up building a system out of an export from that database that then informed a lot of the work that we did. We built a workbook to crunch the average prices for rare plants using price lists supplied by some of our amazing rare plant nurseries. The first question we got from the insurer was, why can't we just buy trees from Bunnings? And there's some pretty straightforward answers to that, but that will be asked. We also collated quarantine costs and import costs for some of those items that we knew we could. You know, and for organisations that might not be able to do that, you know, don't be afraid to ask your networks. You know, many capital city gardens have this data. Royal Botanic Gardens Sydney is a certified quarantine facility, but also you can get quotes. And, you know, I'd just say to those that helped us in that time, we can't thank you enough. It was wonderful how helpful everybody was. We then pulled together costings from recent planting projects, so we could work out the base replacement costs to actually plant semi-advanced trees. And then I built establishment costs. So I calculated basic costings for what it takes us to establish a plant in our living collections. And it's important to know that this is, you know, this is the Botanic Gardens context stuff. We build records. We do things properly. We plant for success. And this was informed by a lot of the things I did in my time in the private sector for many years, quoting, but also how we try to do things here in our organisation. And if you're not sure, there's lots of people to help, but also you can seek quotes because there are lots of contractors out there that do this stuff all the time. But we can also now add in other things where we can put dollar values on that are supported by science and evidence. And using the iTree suite of tools is a great way to quantify some of the monetary values for carbon sequestration and ecosystem services. So we can actually make a strong case for including the value of mature trees in our values, not just replacements. And we have millions of dollars worth of carbon stored in our trees. But Barb are helping try to use some of those tools to do a bit of a broad brushstroke assessment across the BCARM's network. And, you know, those things, you know, when we can put a dollar to that, that's fantastic. We also need to add contemporary considerations, and we need to adapt and anchor our methods to contemporary thinking and values. We can obtain objective values for lots of these line items, and that's from the price paid for timber, artisanal works. You know, on the picture on the left there, that's actually a violin that was made in our tree cycle program that Botanic Gardens of Sydney did many years ago, out of one of the brown barrels up here at the Blue Mountains. And we need to consider things like the cost of removal, you know, and the cost to maintain both proactive risk management and reactive work. But how we incorporate those needs to be determined. We need excellent record keeping and documented methods. And I'll just add that the ACT has done a lot of work on the dollar value and cost saving of proactive tree management. And I think, you know, in terms of anchoring that, you know, should the cost of removal or the value of the mulch that we produce out of removing a tree outstrip the value of that tree if it were alive? We turn our gardens into mulch. We turn our trees into mulch for our gardens, and we also buy in mulch, and we've got to anchor to that idea. And personally, I feel it's perverse that someone could argue that a mature tree in our living collection should be valued at less than the value of the mulch it produces when we cut down. I would estimate that pile in that image there is approximately $2,000 worth of mulch if we're buying it in at $40 a cubic metre. So who can do it? Well, Barb BCARM, we've got so many great minds, and there are recognised experts from within the horticulture and arboriculture sector, experts from organisations with similar collections and functions, some of whom are presenting or have presented in this forum today. Just imagine if we had a globally recognised Botanic Gardens living collection valuation method. I think it's an amazing opportunity for BGANs to harness our incredible expertise and lead the way on this. And I'll leave you with that thought. So thank you on behalf of our amazing arborists. This is Matt, Lachlan and Jason, our Sydney arborists, and they're up in a tree creating a habitat tree for Gangang cockatoos. So thank you, and I look forward to having a chat with you all about this as we go forward.
So Ian's not present, but I'd like to thank him on your behalf. I'm sure he'll listen to this recording, but that was a pretty amazing overview evaluation. I think it also a call to arms in terms of how we value our collections and getting them recognised. So thanks, Ian. That was great. I want to move to Patrick Fisher now, and Patrick is the National Wool Museum Director. And you think, well, what's that got to do with collections? I'm sure he's involved in cultural collections, and this brings a different, probably, slant on how we might view our living collections. And it's important to have different perspectives because it is a very challenging area in how we value the plants around us that we work with. So, Patrick, I'll hand over to you, and I'm sure you're going to make us think. So, thanks very much.
No pressure there. So, thanks for that. Let's see if I can share my screen here and then do something bigger. There. Can everyone see that? Okay, I think.
Yep,
Yeah?
yep, it's good.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks everyone for inviting me to the party and allowing me to join along. Yeah, again, I'm director at the National Wool Museum here with the City of Greater Geelong, and we are also the caretakers of the city's broader art and heritage collection, both the indoor and movable collections and the outdoor collections, such as monuments and works in the public realm. We do a lot of work both indoors and outdoors in that space. You know, the picture here, I just wanted to say, you know, some of us are really big fans of green wallpaper. So, you know, don't say green wallpaper like it's a bad thing. But, you know, really thanks to BGAN for inviting me along to have a chat. And well, before I do anything else, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm actually coming to this group from the unceded lands of the Wadawurrung. The Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And add to that just a little bit, you know, building on what some of the other speakers have said, is that for me and for us, this acknowledgement of country is really important, particularly in these days when you know, with all the discussion around things like this. And it's about the meaning of this place, you know, where we are, where we come from, the land that we walk on. And for me and for our community, this place we now call Geelong. And like a handshake or a bow, this is a ritual of mutual acknowledgement and respect that says that, you know, it's not yours, it's not mine, it's not theirs, it's ours. This is a shared cultural experience and a shared respect. Particularly within this sense of place, and so it's an important thing that then makes us now part of this continuation of cultural tradition and cultural heritage, and that is the space where I come into this discussion on, and the team that I'm fortunate enough to lead come into this. We are caretakers of cultural heritage and cultural assets, and so we fully recognize that these are, you know, public inheritance that we are taking care of, and most definitely trees, plants, buildings, tangible things like, you know, anything from milk bottles to paintings, and intangible, the stories that we have and that we share. These are all part of the same collective. And if you're anything like I am, you know, when I was asked to do this, I thought, oh heavens, how am I going to, you know, relay my experience and my work in a cultural heritage sense across botanics? So I reached out to friends and colleagues both here and back in the United States. full disclosure, I'm from New York originally, not from Australia. And, to see what it is, where there's a cross-pollination here, for lack of a better word, and pardon the pun. And there's a great deal of work being done around the world in terms of how we value our cultural assets. And, I put my PowerPoint on auto, and it is not auto playing. So I'm going to skip through a couple of these here and kind of get to, I have 15 minutes now to deliver to you a doctoral dissertation on, what we collect, why we collect, how we value what it is that we collect, and then how we communicate that value to a public. According to statistics, half of whom have never even really stepped foot in a museum or a public botanic garden before. And so how do we acknowledge the value of things, which is based on a generationally changing set of ideals and priorities. And for museums and what is called the GLAM sector, which is galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, valuation generally does not start with dollar value. That's probably the last valuation that most institutions will go into. And following up on what Ian had said, I would lay a lot of my reputation on the fact that the Australia Museum has very much value to that canoe. And they know not only its dollar and insurance value, but they know its cultural heritage value as well, because that is something that museums really do pretty well. So I will do my best to relay some of that to you in 1,500 words or less. I just want to share this particular image with you that looks like something gardeny, but really is not. This is a garment that is coming into an exhibition that we are about to launch on sustainable fashion, and I thought that this was appropriate for the conversation that we're having now because it talks a little bit about it evokes a feeling of the natural world around us, but it also definitely speaks to collections, and it speaks to contemporary practice in the industries, in the fashion industry, the work that we do in sustainable ethical practice, which also then translates to sustainable and ethical practice within collections as well. And there's the garment on its full. Before I get tucked into a little bit more of the discussion around how we value things, I wanted to share a couple of definitions with you, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, because it can be very frustrating when you get halfway through a robust discussion only to find out that what you were talking about, you may be talking about the same word, but your resolutions come from very different perspectives. Because, after all, my definition of terrific means something that's extra delightful, and someone else's definition of terrific may mean something extra horrifying. So it's always good to start with a little bit of an understanding of where we're coming from. And for us, collections and cultural and heritage. I love some of these particular definitions around collection. And one of the things I really love about this terrific word is that it means all at once a gathering of things and a bringing together of things, a hunting and gathering, or hoarding, as perhaps maybe some people might call it. But it also means the act of taking something away and removing it. So that speaks a little bit around how our collections work, with the ever-growing, some may call static collections of museums and galleries, and the very dynamic collections within gardens and things, because for the most part, my understanding is, particularly when you come to botanics and arboretums and others, your collections are growing, but they also eventually die. And so there's a very different dynamic between, a collection that may have, Nefertiti's head, and it's going to be around for a very, very long time, but a collection that may have a series of plants that have a finite life, and how does the dynamics of that, and then how do you value those things that change a lot. Culture. culture is one of those words like love and art. It has many, many definitions all over the place, but it is a really important concept and construct and behavioral value around where it is that we're talking about. That social contract that is really fundamental to collecting in a public institutional sense. And you can see that from part of the UNESCO definition of what culture is. And I love the fact that within the myriad of definitions of culture, one of them is about the manifestations of human achievement regarded collectively. And this is the space where we are all working, and whether it be botanic gardens or museums and galleries, these are the manifestations of human achievement, and whether it be working on the land and with the natural environment or with the built and cultural environment. And the last one is heritage. There are really so many definitions of heritage out there, particularly if you look on a global sense. And it amazes me every time that we talk about heritage, and I go out and I talk to people who are within the field, and I use the definition of heritage is that it is that which is inherited or inheritance. And people, and until you actually hear that, you may not get that the very root of the word is about inheritance. And this is an intergenerational contract. It is the things that we find important today that we want to share amongst ourselves in this time, and then we want to pass it on to another generation or into the future. And that is at the core of public collecting for institutions like museums, fully recognizing that heritage has one foot in the past, history, and then one foot in the future, legacy. So I think just moving forward, there's going to be a bunch of random pictures, not really necessarily tied to what we're talking about, but it talks about connection and interaction with collections and the kinds of things that we value. I'd like to ask this group, an exercise you can do when you go back to your teams and when you're kind of thinking of moving forward is ask yourselves, what exactly is it that we do? For those of you who are familiar with it, you might go through like the Simon Sinek, start with the why and the what. For me, sometimes for some of the work we do with the teams that I work with and lead with, what is it that we do? Well, we develop and we protect and we provide access to Australian culture. And that is inherent in valuing what it is, the things that we collect. And the things that we protect and provide access to. So how do you value something? How do you recognize that value and apply that filter across your collections, living, dead, or otherwise? And then once we do value it, how do we communicate that, especially beyond just dollars and cents? Because again, particularly for cultural heritage collections, it is well beyond dollars and cents. And volumes have been written about this, about how cultural collections are valued, and their practitioners all over the world that have gone full Mad Hatter in trying to chase it, bottle it, champion, and protect it. Now, the things that are on the screen right now, I am by no means a proponent of these. This is just a couple of screen grabs on a quick internet search in terms of how do you value your heritage collections or your cultural collections. And these are all the myriad of different ways and forms that we can do it. It's everything from Worth Point to the Australian Tax Office. And, and the GLAM sector in particular is really packed with expert opinion on best practice. And this, for us, the reality of it is value is dependent on the why and the who, and can change really dramatically based on the what. What is it, and why are we valuing it? Is it the social history, the historical, the monetary, the rarity? Are we preserving it and protecting it, or are we providing access to it? And really, for the most part, it comes down to a lot about protecting and storytelling and sharing. There's a lot of it that deals with the tangible and the intangible in this space. And the institutions have built really multi-step methods in how they identify and how they value things. there's filters across that. Is it a public collection or a private collection? Are we assessing the individual objects or the entire collection as a whole? Are we evaluating the thing itself, its use, its association with another, who, what used it, who grew it, the legal and ethical considerations in that, discussion on authenticity and attribution, which greatly affects value within our realm. And then there's the dollars and cents. There's the insurance valuations and the resale and replacement. And my all-time favorite, which is depreciation of assets that actually appreciate in value, dollar value, which is one of my conundrums in the cultural heritage space. So I went out and I tried to kind of do a little bit of research on this, and I found two things that that some of you may find of interest. First, and I'm sure most of you will know about him, Michael Dossman, who's the keeper of living collections at the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard University. And I found an interesting paper that he co-authored through, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I want to say it's Botanic Gardens and Sustainability in 2024, and it's a case study in living collection development, and highlighted that living collections, arboretums, botanic gardens, and so forth and so on, are museums like any other museum, like the Guggenheim, like the Met, like the National Wool Museum. We are collecting agencies that are there to preserve, protect, provide access to, and then educate around these things. And because they foster a sense of discovery and learning, and I don't want to use the term reverence, but I will, for lack of a better moment, a sense of reverence around these things. The second thing is a book by a local author named Luke Keogh, who, full disclosure, was a curator here at the museum, and he teaches history at Deakin University, and his book is on the Wardian case. And it's just an interesting read around how this particular object changed the world. Unintended consequences of moving plants around the world and things like that. But I think for me, just in closing on this, is the Wardian case kind of is a bit of a symbol for both heritage collections, fixed things that have a finite use and that we recognize as really valuable to us because of what they did. They changed the world. They brought coffee to the world. They brought sugar to the world, those kinds of things. And the botanic world, keeping things alive and growing within our collections. So in closing, really, some lessons from the GLAM sector. Valuing collections really is about strategy, doing things in a very considered way, documentation. And communication is really about connection. Both David and Ian alluded to this, is that, it's about how we collect things in a place, how we connect them to place, and its context. And then putting that context on a very personal level, the stories of it, the connections of it, and how these things, the value of them, are how they connect with our society and how they connect with each other. So, there's a whole bunch of stuff in this. I'll zip through this to the end. Sorry to give you craziness. But name and number there. Happy to be of service and give any kind of support now or into the future if you really ever need anything from us in terms of how we value things and if you need other resources. And on that note, I will stop prattling on and stop sharing at the same time. And hopefully that was of some use to you.
Thanks, Patrick. That was really interesting insights into and I think particularly the emphasis on the intrinsic value of things rather than just looking at dollars and cents. So I think we sort of explored experiential value with Dave, the experience of value that we have. We looked at monetary value and this intrinsic value, if I can put it in those terms. And I think all approaches by the presenters have value depending on the context in which we're looking. So, but I want to hand over to questions now because we're running out of time. But Patrick and Dave have agreed to stay a bit longer. So if you've got a burning question, please either do it verbally or put it in the chat. And remember to put questions for Ian. No one's put any questions in there, but he will review this. So I think it would help him if there's questions that can actually help with better valuation. So please think about questions for Ian as well. But I'll hand over to questions.
There's one in the chat, Peter, from Renee.
I can't see it, sorry.
Okay,
It's not
maybe
coming up.
Renee.
Oh, here it is.
You got it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want me to? I can read it out. The question is for Dave. Dave, if people who don't visit Botanic Gardens associate the with plant events like entertainment, concerts, etc., but they associate Botanic Gardens with through and for plants, will putting on with events actually attract new audiences, as it is sometimes claimed? Hope you got that.
Yeah. Yep. So thanks for that question. I think that's a really good one. And I think we honestly don't know the answer to that. So I'd be interested to know if anybody is doing research to see if the, because I do think that those events attract people who don't normally go to Botanic Gardens. So whether that's sticky and they come back in different ways and experience the through plants or for plants, it's a good question. So there's lots of reasons why we're doing events and other things like that. But I wonder how connected they are really to the sort of essence of what Botanic Gardens are. So maybe we're doing those things where they aren't really well. Sometimes they are, but where they're not really well aligned with plants and this sort of passive recreational dimension of Botanic Gardens. Yeah. Whether that is kind of adds enduring kind of value to Botanic Gardens. I think that these are good questions, and it'd be nice to know more about it.
Can I just jump in on that for just a second in terms of other cultural venues and destinations, museums and such? When you cross-pollinate audiences like that, and you do Shakespeare in the Park or in the Botanic Gardens, or you bring someone in to do chamber music in the middle of your museum, you are inherently bringing a different audience in. Now, whether that translates to one event or multiple events, there is research that's being done around the world, particularly within cultural venues, around that space, and I would imagine there would be a percentage of crossover in audience development and growth within Botanic Gardens as well. But it's getting yourself in the mindset where you are embracing enough of risk to say, let's do things outside of our normal box and look at something new and bring in a different experience into the space.
Thanks, Patrick. We've got a few more questions come up. There's probably a question here more for Ian about how Botanic Gardens collaborate with the landscape profession to buy and transplant mature trees into development. So I think I'll park that one for Ian to respond in some way. But there's a long question from Robert Mackinson here about, for you, Dave, again. Botanic Gardens who run inquiry services such as plant ID or plant clinics. People who use those services don't necessarily visit the garden, but whether Botanic Gardens, I'm trying to summarise this, can make use of that inquiry to do follow-up with those people in connecting to them. Do we do this enough? I suppose that virtual audience, people who just say, I want this plant identified, but they don't actually visit the garden. Is that another avenue? Do we call these visitors or non-visitors? It's people who are not necessarily coming to the garden, but using the services.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bob. And well, Bob and I crossed paths a little bit. I used to be on Australia's Threatened Species Scientific Committee, and Bob wrote an excellent action plan for myrtle rust, which I recommend if people aren't already aware of that. So I think that, so in my mind, I think that there's a whole lot of ways that Botanic Gardens can interact with society outside of the boundaries of the Botanic Garden, and services like this is a really useful way of doing that. So I do think the idea of bringing events into Botanic Gardens is here to stay, and it'll be interesting to think about the effects of that on, learnings from that from other cultural institutions. I do think that the key mission of Botanic Gardens is really important, and we shouldn't lose sight of that, though. So I wonder if the chamber music in the cultural institution, how that's connected to the collection or to the, to the operation of those institutions. But these, this core focus on plants, so both in terms of conservation and in horticulture, has a myriad of ways that we can connect with other organisations, with the broader public outside of the Botanic Garden. So the technical point about people bringing in plant material for ID, it's just for me an example of that sort of untapped ability of Botanic Gardens to connect in a whole lot of different ways. So I'm not sure that really answers Bob's question, but hopefully add some thoughts.
Thanks, Dave. I'm just looking through. There's another question from Claire. This is another question for you, Dave, but Patrick, if you want to jump, if there's one I'll jump in. Are there any examples of successful events with the way people align with Botanic Gardens? So I presume this is more with plants. That's the question from Claire.
Yeah, it is a good question. So maybe the events, sort of specific events, I'm sure there's hundreds and hundreds happening all around the world. I guess I'm immediately thinking of things like they had this great kind of beehive installation in Kew when I was lucky enough to visit there a couple of years ago. And there was some kind of nice interpretation connecting stories about biodiversity and pollinators and plants to this kind of monumental public art installation. So I think I can kind of think of some things like that. So events are a little bit different. I feel like I've been to a bunch of those. I've been to Lightscape and other things. It's all nice. There's a heap of people there who don't normally go to Botanic Gardens. But I feel that some things like that could be better connected to that sort of key mission, the key stories of Botanic Gardens. Not wanting to be critical, but I'm sure other people have got better examples than I can come up with.
There's another question here, which is an interesting one, and it may be, you frame it as a maladaptive a maladaptive pathway from valuation. But the question's around rare plants, donations, and trays into state, and could these be discouraged due to insurance costs? And I think, Patrick, this could also apply to museum artefacts. If they're valued at such a high rate, does that mean that the exchange or sharing of those collections, either living or dead collections, is that going to retard the value of them for people if they're valued in monetary terms and something's worth $2 billion? Is it going to move around for other people to share? Is it a negative pathway?
Well, that's one of the age-old questions within the museum sector too. But I mean, it's these things do travel. Look at the NGV in London, in Melbourne, when they bring rare masters from Europe. I mean, it could take 10 years to figure out the logistics of that, and moving major cultural pieces from one country to another, because there's all kinds of protocols around releasing that. But I don't think it prohibits it. What it does is I think it limits it to certain institutions and that have the scope and the resources to make that happen. But that doesn't mean that smaller ones can't do that on a more individual level. I mean, I guess it depends on what your goals are. If your goals are to diversify your audience and bring more people in than you've ever had who have never been there before, you will have to do things that those audiences might want to engage in. And that will then means going back to your community and saying, what is it that you want to see happen here, and can we make that happen for you? You have to ask the questions. Asking this navel gazing and asking these questions amongst ourselves is a great exercise. But ultimately, you have to go out to your community and say, what is it that you'd like to see here in this resource?
Thanks for that. I might keep trying to move through the questions. Christine's asked an interesting one. and it refers to more dried or specimen collections, so herbarium vouchers. Are they considered as an important part of the public collection? So do the public read the preserved collections in the herbaria as part of the collection? It's a good question.
So I did ask some questions about different aspects of science. So there was a lot of questions that went into that sort of summary. So people recognise and distinguish between horticulture and a variety of different plant science activities. So yeah, I'm sure that maybe literacy around that is a little less than some other things, but it seems to be well established, and the public are aware of those functions of botanic gardens.
There's another question for Ian, which I might Lee. I'll just check that I haven't missed any. I think I've covered off all the ones that are relevant to the speakers. Any closing questions for Patrick or Dave? Dave's answered a few. If you've got one for Patrick, that would be good, but we probably want to try and close up soon. I know a few people are dropping out. Sorry, Dave.
I can make a comment. It was really good to hear Patrick's talk, and I'm based in Western Victoria. I'll have to come and visit sometime, and I feel like I guess I've thought a bit about the connection with zoos and other green spaces that botanic gardens have, but the connection to other cultural institutions is a really interesting one, and it's probably been thought through. There's probably more intellectual, theoretical stuff going on in the cultural space that would definitely, I think, be of value. So thanks for coming along, and the organisers for putting us all together like this. And maybe just one other comment would be the economic valuation is really important, but we shouldn't start in a place that discounts all of the other kinds of value that plants and trees have. So it might be that we have a formula that comes up with a number, but we shouldn't ignore all of these other things. Whatever mechanism we use to value collections and trees needs to be able to collect information on cultural connections and amenity and just a whole heap of other things. So.
Thanks, Dave. Patrick, do you have any closing comments you'd like to offer?
Really, to stand on the shoulder of a giant, David. Just to completely echo what it is that you just said. First of all, it'd be great to host you out here in Geelong if you're ever out here, or if I'm ever out in the Western District. But it's the economic value of something is just one facet of the many, many facets of what make these things valuable and important to our communities and society. And it's often the social value or the health value outweighs the financial value. And you can apply the same filters across many, many things. Hospitals are not self-sustaining any more than botanic gardens are, and we support hospitals, and we support botanic gardens, and we support museums, and we have to look at the big picture on this, and how they all support each other.
Thank you. I mean, this has been a really fascinating session, and I think there's room for more work in this space. I can see some workshops and more development. I think it's something that botanic gardens and other cultural institutions have to really grapple with. So I think we could do a lot more work in this, and I think this is really just the beginning. So people think they want more, please advise BCARMs, and it may keep going as a bit of a topic to develop further. But it is something we struggle with in the value of the things that we look after and hold custodianship for. So thanks to both speakers, but also thanks, Ian, for the recording. You've all done a fantastic job of bringing some different insights and encouraging thoughts and conversation. So thanks for all the listeners, and we're done. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.